Hello and welcome to Quadriga. This week, 70 years to the day after Israel was founded, the U.S. reversed decades of American foreign policy and took action to make the recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital official by formally relocating its embassy to Jerusalem and sending President Trump's daughter, Ivanka, with her husband, Jared Kushner, to inaugurate the new premises. A triumph for some Israelis, but a bitter provocation for many Palestinians who see Jerusalem as their own capital. Their mass attempt to cross the border fence separating Israel from Gaza turned into the bloodiest protest in years, coming just after Trump's announcement that the U.S. will no longer comply with the Iran nuclear agreement, but instead reimpose sanctions. The embassy launch was the second move with highly disruptive implications for the already volatile Middle East. Can and should Europe counter Trump and the Middle East? Any role for Europe? That's our topic. And these are our guests. It's a pleasure to welcome Nora Müller. She is Executive Director of International Affairs at the Körber Foundation. And she says after Trump's decisions in the Middle East, the Europeans must do damage control. And very glad to have on the program Shani Rozanes. She was born in Israel, is a producer and Middle East analyst here at DW. And she says, too divided and self-involved, Europe is systematically failing to fill the void left by American policy. And finally, very glad to have back on the program Alan Posener. He's an author for the daily newspaper here in Germany, Die Welt. And he says, Europe and America are strong when they act together. When they don't, America is weakened and Europe becomes invisible. So, Alan, more than 50 deaths, 2,400 people injured on Monday. On this program, you vigorously defended the U.S. decision to relocate the embassy at the end of last year, the decision taken then. And I'm wondering, do you abide by that opinion in the face of this bloodshed?
Absolutely, more than ever. Look, this bloodshed has nothing to do with the moving of the embassy. This bloodshed was planned by Hamas and its Iranian backers for over a year. This march of return, which means reconquista of Israel, has been planned by Hamas, as I say, for over a year. It's to mark what they call Nakba Day, the day of the catastrophe, the day that Israel was founded and many Palestinians lost their home. And they've been wanting these more martyrs for months and months, and they planned towards that. And there would have been violence at the border anyway, no matter what Mr. Trump did or didn't do. So please do not conflate these two issues of the movement of the embassy to Jerusalem, which is a perfectly peaceful, just putting on a new plaque on a building that already stands there, and this terrible incitement by Hamas to send people into their deaths at the border.
Nora Müller, the Palestinians who stormed the fence did have multiple reasons to be frustrated, including the weakness and corruption of their own administration and, of course, Israel's intransigence. So can we really lay this violence at Donald Trump's door, as many people have been doing?
Well, I wouldn't argue that it is only to be blamed on Donald Trump. I think there are multiple other reasons for the Palestinians to be frustrated, but I do believe that the embassy movement to Jerusalem is of a very inflammatory nature, and I think it's not for no reason that the issue of Jerusalem has been delayed in the peace negotiations between Palestinians and Israelis to the final status talks. So I think creating facts on the ground, which are not only facts on the ground, but which are to the benefit of just one party to the conflict without actually giving a similar concession, a similarly important concession to the other side, is a highly problematic move. And the question you ask is, why would the Americans do that at this point in time? Because it's unclear to me what is the return on investment, if you will. So I think that is a question we really have to ask to Washington.
And I want to ask that question about timing in just a moment. But Shani Rozanes, first of all, Donald Trump has defended Israel's use of force on Monday, but there has been widespread condemnation elsewhere of what critics say was a very disproportionate use of live ammunition against mostly unarmed protesters. Amnesty International has called it a scandalous violation of both international law and human rights. How do you see it?
Well, there's no doubt that the American support or backing of Israeli moves when it comes to Gaza, but not just Gaza, of course, keeps Israelis much more calm, even when we see a lot of protests coming from Europe. Because as we could see on Monday with the moving of the plaque, yes, it's just a plaque, but of course the symbol behind it, and that all that matters in the Middle East, the symbol is quite great. The symbolism is amazing. So in that aspect, we could see that ceremony as cementing that bond, that conservative religious bond between Israel and America. And as long as Israel's got America's backing, they feel quite fine and solid and quiet, despite the fact that, of course, this is quite controversial and rightfully so. And we also need to keep in mind, Hamas themselves have their stories not really aligned. You know, at the beginning, the first explanation was these are all harmless people, unarmed, but then Hamas spokesperson himself yesterday confirmed that 50 out of the casualties were actually Hamas people. So they're, in that way, shooting their own arguments in the leg in not being too persistent with their claim of what has happened. So controversial, yes, but it always is in this region, you know?
So the date that was chosen for this symbolic and controversial move was, in fact, the time of year when tensions between Israel and Palestinians are at their highest, anniversary of Israel's founding and anniversary of the Palestinian expulsion. The question is, should the U.S. have known it was adding fuel to a fire? Let's hear what the main protagonists had to say about the decision.
This is a great day for Israel. It's a great day for America. It's a great day for our fantastic partnership. But I believe it's also a great day for peace.
Israel is a sovereign nation with the right, like every other sovereign nation, to determine its own capital. The United States remains fully committed to facilitating a lasting peace agreement.
What we saw in Jerusalem today was not the opening of an embassy, but the opening of an American settlement outpost.
Ellen, hasn't the U.S., in essence, given up any pretense of being impartial or being in the role of an arbiter between the two sides? And if so, what are the consequences of that for the peace process?
America, I hope, was never impartial as regards Israel, and I wish Europe would be less impartial because it's perfectly clear that the position of the West has to be on the side of the region's only functioning democracy. Israel, 70 years of democracy, never been in doubt, although the state itself has been attacked time and time again by its neighbors. Surely that's a reason not to be impartial. If the Arabs want to come to a peace deal, they have to realize, and Europe needs to send this message too, that Israel isn't going to go away and its friends aren't going to go away from it, so they're not impartial. We are friends of the Israelis. We're certainly not friends of Hamas, and we're not friends of Mr. Abbas, who just recently said that the Jews was responsible for the Holocaust. I mean, come on, don't we have any principles here? Surely, if we have any principles at all, it means standing behind Israel and telling the other side, we're here. What are you giving us?
Nora Müller, how do you see it?
I think from a German point of view, of course, it's clear that Israel's security is part of our raison d'etat. I mean, that's what the Chancellor said in the Knesset, I think it was back in 2008. With this said, however, I do believe that we have, because the Israelis are our friends and because we feel that they're going wrong when it comes to settlement activities and all of that, that we have to be critical in that regard. And I think that is at the core of our engagement in the Middle East peace process. So I would say that, yes, I mean, the Americans have taken themselves out of the game in terms of their ability to be an honest broker to some extent. And yes, this would be the European moment to jump in and to take over that role. I wouldn't necessarily say that we don't have any tools in our diplomatic toolbox vis-a-vis the parties to the conflict. I am not sure, however, whether, the Europeans can fill that vacuum that was left by Washington.
Let me come back to that in just a moment, because we do have a soundbite from Angela Merkel on that and other issues. But let me first ask you, Shani, two questions. First of all, Israel as a democracy. Some people worry that if we go on much longer without something like a two-state solution or some other outcome of a peace process, that Israel may find itself forced to choose between being a democracy and being a Jewish state. So would you say, in fact, there is urgency here in terms of where the so-called dormant peace process is going?
I think what you're saying is exactly the point, and this is where we need to put, the emphasis on the difference between what Alan and Nora is saying. There is more than one way to be pro-Israel, and Alan takes one stand, which is, let's say, pro-regime, pro-government. It takes a very clear stand. It's backing not only Israel as a state, but also this particular government and its policy, while Nora is saying we can be pro-Israel, and we can say, and rightfully so, there is more than one way. If we feel, and there are many people within Israel, there are many loud voices within Israel saying settlements are not conducive, not to the peace process, not to Israel, not for Israel's own future, if we don't want to jeopardize the Jewish majority of the state and allow it to be a separate state and not one state, which might end up being, if we look at the demographics, if we look at the numbers, with so many Palestinians inside. And then if we don't want to give the Palestinians their rights, how can we still claim to be a democracy? So this very discussion is in the heart of what we're talking about. And there is no doubt that this current regime does not feel too much of a rush. They're knowing they have a backing of the White House, at least for the next, probably maybe for 8 years, but definitely for the next 3 more years. And Netanyahu himself, if you look at his policy, if you try to understand what he's been doing so far, his strategy is waiting it out, seeing how the rest of the Arab world is, where does this go, especially following the Arab Spring and the unrest that followed that. But this is what he believes is the right thing to do. I'm not certain there are so many voices within Israel that necessarily think it's the only way we should go, or this is the smartest way we should go.
Alan Posener, Donald Trump is a firm believer that disruption can produce surprisingly constructive results. And the fact is, conventional diplomacy has so far essentially achieved only a stalemate. So how confident are you that by shaking things up, he can in some way reactivate something like a constructive peace process?
I'm very confident, actually, because it's not true, actually, that conventional diplomacy has created a stalemate. Conventional diplomacy over the 8 years of the Obama administration has created a catastrophe for everyone concerned in the Middle East. Look at Syria. Look at the situation of the Palestinians. Look at Yemen. Look at the rise of Iran. I mean, look at Lebanon. Terrible situation. All caused by doing nothing. So shaking the do-nothing approach up and saying, OK, we're putting everything on the table. Now let's see you deliver. It's already working. Look, after Trump said we're moving the embassy to Jerusalem, up came Prince Salman of Saudi Arabia, Salman bin Mohammed, and said to Abbas personally and publicly, you need to recognize Israel finally and deal with the reality. Al-Sisi, the president of Egypt, tried to convince Mr. Haniyeh of Hamas not to do these demonstrations. You can see already how the perception of America as being firm and not some kind of pudding nail to the wall is forcing the Arabs to face up to reality. This is good, not bad.
I want to, okay,
yeah,
briefly, because I want to get it.
Mohammed bin Salman also was the one who said, we will never neutralize our relationship with Israel as long as there's no solution to the Palestinian problem. He's being very cautious, and it's true that Saudis, you can see that Saudi is in one clear alliance with Israel, because we have Iran as the big devil, bringing Washington and of course, Israel and Saudi Arabia together. But if you still feel that the Palestinians can be the one who deliver a peace deal to the Middle East, I wish I could have your optimism. I think you're delusional.
Okay,
Alan.
I'm going to interrupt us right there because I want to take us back to our topic of Europe's role. And I mentioned a soundbite from Angela Merkel, so let's listen to that. If we look at the region as a whole, she had some rather self-critical remarks to make during her first speech to the Parliament after being sworn in for another term as Chancellor. Let's hear them.
Europe is directly impacted by this situation. At the same time, we've not done enough to try and work out a political solution to this dispute. I acknowledge that. I have no illusions about the complexities of this situation, but I believe that we must become more involved in resolving this dispute, and Germany will do that.
Nora Müller, I guess you agree that Germany should do more because you wrote in your book on female diplomacy, and you also referred in your opening statement to damage control. But what exactly would that mean in this case? What very concretely could and should Germany and Europe be doing?
Look, I think this whole talk about the deal of the century and the ultimate deal that we've been hearing from Washington.
Now, in regard to Iran.
Now we're talking about.
No, I'm sorry. Which deal do you mean? Donald Trump talks a lot about a lot of deals.
No, I was referring back to our previous topic, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I just wanted to add that I don't believe in the idea of, this big deal, this ultimate deal that Trump has been promising. I think where Europe can come in is, taking us back to realities on the ground and making small steps, more, opting for more of an incremental approach. I sometimes use the image of a marathon. At this point in time, because peace doesn't seem to be around the corner, I think we have to opt more for a shorter run than for the 42-kilometer marathon, meaning that Europe, for example, could propose a more incremental approach where we can start rebuilding trust between the parties to the conflict. That could be on the Israeli side, maybe a freeze of settlements, no more construction work beyond the Green Line. Whereas on the Palestinian side, there could be an end to the payments to so-called martyrs' families. These could be, very initial steps that could help rebuild trust. And there is a role for Europe to be played there, I think.
Shani, Rozanes, you said in your opening statement that so far you don't see Europe stepping into the void. What would you want to see them do?
Well, I think first of all, the using of the term Europe is misleading. What's Europe? You put for now we still have Britain there, but that's not going to last for too long.
We have a European Union that claims it wants to have a common.
Quite split within himself. We're talking about Austria, Czech Republic, Hungary, and Romania, who sent their delegates quite proudly to join the Americans this week with the inauguration of the embassy. They're part of the EU. Are they going to be supporting every step that Tusk or Juncker or Mogherini are bringing? What is the EU? If you look at the dominant forces, if you look at the two dominant leaders, and you see Macron, obviously, from France, and you see Angela Merkel here, they are also quite... Macron is very, he's young, he's energetic, he has all these initiatives. He want to bring France into as much as... we've seen a great deal of him done in the last year that he's in office, but then we see Angela Merkel just receding and receding. German foreign policy is actually about doing as less as we can. We're talking about marathon. They're not even putting their shoes on. We are talking about a bunch of people are bandwagoning. There is no clear policy for the EU.
Let me just come in on
very briefly, if you would, because I really want to get us to Iran.
I think that's the perfect lead over. I think when you look at Iran and when you look at European efforts to keep up the JCPOA,
the nuclear agreement with Iran.
Exactly, the nuclear agreement. I think that's so much more than just putting our shoes on, right? The Europeans really do try to stand up to the Americans to some extent, although that's not a position that we want to be in. We want to be in a working transatlantic partnership, but here we are, and we see Mogherini, and we see the German, the French, and the British foreign minister stand up together and trying to work out how we can salvage that deal. That is in our own security interest, by the way.
We have a very short report on where things stand with Iran. Let's just take a look at that.
Germany, Britain, and France are still committed to the Iran nuclear deal. Their their foreign ministers will work with Iran to try to keep it alive.
This agreement directly affects the security interests of Europe. Without this agreement, there will be more insecurity and uncertainty about developments in Iran and the Near and Middle East.
The deal lifts economic sanctions on Iran, provided that Tehran limits its nuclear activities and allows international inspectors to verify compliance. But now, President Trump has restored the old sanctions and threatened to impose new ones on businesses that trade with Iran.
We are going to see whether the political will that has been expressed by the remaining participants in JCPOA can be translated into specific actions, and we will see them. Thank you.
The U.S. has stepped up the pressure on the Europeans. Can they stand up to Washington?
Alan, they claim they want to do just that. They revived something called a blocking resolution, a tactic that was used in regard to Cuba sanctions, essentially telling European companies not to comply with new U.S. sanctions. Can that possibly be effective? And you talked about Europe and the U.S. working together. Is there any possible compromise you see out there?
What a pass if we come to that you're asking this question. The point is, if Europe's leaders had any sense, they would have left the deal too. Because the only way we can put pressure on Iran to actually comply with the deal is by reimposing the sanctions and then saying, look, we want you to do this,
but
that,
Iran
and the
is
other.
Complying with the deal,
No, Iran is not complying with it. Iran is
the
building...
International Atomic Energy Agency says
all they say is that they're enriching the amount of uranium that they are allowed to enrich. But they are not complying with the deal as far as... There are also Security Council resolutions about the missiles they're allowed to buy. They're not complying with that. There are Security Council resolutions about they're not allowed to supply any weapons to Hezbollah.
Those are not
in Lebanon.
part of the
They've
deal.
given them 150,000 rockets. How long do we want to stand by while one country just dismisses everything and we still give them money, which is basically what getting rid of sanctions means? We are funding people who want to kill us. Now, come on. We need
Nora,
to stop
Müller,
this.
The U.S. has talked about trying to bring those other issues into some sort of larger package. Europeans were willing to talk about that, were they not?
Exactly. I think we have to create a bit of order here. I think the nuclear deal, the JCPOA, is a non-proliferation arms control deal, which has nothing to do with Iran's regional activities, which has nothing to do with ballistic missiles, with human rights. Those are separate issues. I think it is very important, as you said, Alan, to address these issues vis-a-vis the Iranians. And I do believe that the Europeans also have a role to play there, because unlike the Americans, they have channels, they have the ways and means to talk to Tehran. The Americans,
what success have we had up to now with these incredible channels? I always hear about we have to strengthen the reformers in Iran. The reformers aren't in power. The people who are in power are people who want to eliminate Israel and who are building missiles which can reach Europe. I mean, what back channels?
Let me bring Shani Rozanes into this, please, because we're very close to the end of our program here. Shani, Trump is banking on the idea that it's possible to get a much better comprehensive deal with Iran on all of these points. What do you think is the likelihood of that?
With Trump, chances are slim to none, because had he wanted to improve the deal, he should have stayed on, should have stayed with the negotiations and say, let's try to find a way to do that. But he's being very harsh. I don't think, and also looking at Trump's record, he's promising better deals when it comes to Paris climate agreement. He's promised better deals when it came to Obamacare, when talking about better healthcare for Americans. He's really good with tarnishing what's existing. I haven't seen him finding constructive, better solutions yet.
So let me ask you this, coming back to the European move. You said you want to see bolder action from the EU. Are you satisfied with this new call for this blocking resolution that would tell European companies, hey, don't go along with the U.S. sanctions? And if so, who's going to indemnify them for their losses?
Well, it's great question. I think this resolution just shows the helplessness of Europe. You know, they're being desperate, they're grasping at straw, and this is what they could come up with. But as you're saying yourself, the way to implement it, the way to enforce it, very limited. And I'm not sure Europeans have the guts to go into this trade war with America. I'm not sure they can last there.
I wouldn't want the show to end on this note. I think the blocking statute is just one part of a wider package that the Europeans are trying to put together to salvage the JCPOA. So I think that's important to stress here.
Alan Posener, one sentence. Are we seeing irreparable divisions between the US and Europe?
If Europe doesn't get its act together, yes.
Only Europe?
Yeah, definitely Europe. We need to deliver and be hard on the Iranians and not on the Americans. We're choosing the wrong enemy.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for being with us, and thanks to you out there for tuning in. See you soon.